Hi guys, Hannah here from HannahMariaPlans and welcome back to another video. This time I'm going to be slowing it down a little and showing you how I painted this sunset scene for my second weekly spread in April. If you haven't already seen my setup, I'll link the video for you now so that you can check it out after this one. I always get started by setting everything out that I'll be using for a spread, and that always includes a candle. This particular one is quite citrusy and always makes me think of spring. I'm going to be using gouache today, but this would work just as easily with watercolours. This particular set is from Miya Arts. I'd love to say that I keep my palette clean, ready for the next time I want to use it, but I would clearly be lying. So, moving on, we need 2 glasses of water for washing your brushes. One will become very dirty, and hopefully the other will stay relatively clean. I like to have a piece of scrap paper to test my colours on, and although I haven't shown it here, you'll also need a paintbrush, pencil, ruler and some tape. Unless you want to paint on the desk, you're going to need a notebook or surface to paint on. I'm of course using my Bujo Almanac notebook that I use for my bullet journal. Lastly, and most importantly for us caffeineaholic individuals, a tasty cup of coffee. Alright then, let's get started. Once I've found my place and got everything clipped down, I like to draw a rough plan of what I'm going to do. I knew I wanted to have a spread with a diagonal slice down the middle. It took me a couple of attempts to get the width I wanted, so ended up counting and recounting, rubbing it out and then counting again. If you'd like to replicate this, then aim for just under halfway at the bottom of the left-hand page to just before the crease on the same side. Then count the number of squares you've used and mirror that on the right so that your lines run parallel. When you're happy with your line placement, grab your tape to mask off the edges. This way, when you paint in the middle and peel the tape off again, you'll have beautifully clean sides without worrying about painting within the lines. Just before I start to actually paint, I'm just using a bit of water and this little cocktail stick to go into my gouache and mix it all up. I find that this particular set has started to dry out. That is definitely partly because I am useless and forgetful and definitely don't always put the lid back on overnight. However, the seal on the lid isn't that good, so I'm not taking all of the blame. Loosening all that paint up again makes it much easier to get mixing. I'm making these colours in advance because I'd like to work with it on the page whilst everything stays wet, so time is limited. Firstly, we need to make a nice deep blue colour. If you have an indigo, that will work perfectly. You'll see me testing the colours as I go so I can add a bit more brown if it's too bright or make other adjustments. Once I'm happy, I make a big batch of it, so I'm sure I'll have enough for the painting and I can move on to my second colour. This is a bright orangey yellow to contrast with the blue. I'm using a bit of this Winsor & Newton Naples yellow gouache for some muted lighter shades, but the main yellow I'll be using is this bright one. Now that I've managed to ramble for, 4 minutes, let's actually do some painting. You want to use your darkest blue at the very top of the page, swiping back and forth to get an even coverage of paint, bringing it down slightly as you go. I'm showing you a bit of real time here so you can see how slowly I actually paint. Most of this video will be sped up a bit so that it doesn't last for an hour or so. I've then mixed a little white gouache into my blue to create a slightly lighter shade. This gets put on towards the middle, and in the same swiping motions, I'm bringing it back up towards the top of the page so it can start to blend into the other colour. Once you're happy with your gradient, give your brush a really good wash. You don't want that blue contaminating the yellow because you'll have a green sky. I've said it before and I'll say it again. You don't want a green sky unless you actually want a green sky. Pick up some of that bright yellow paint and start to bring it up from the bottom of your page this time, going back and forth to keep the paint nice and even. If you're finding it's a bit watery, feel free to add more paint, and if it's not spreading out very well, then add a drop more water. I like to have my gouache the consistency of double cream for painting like this. Rather than adding white for the next layer, I mix in a little Naples yellow. If you don't have that colour, the white will be a close alternative. Bring this up towards the middle, making sure you get lighter as you go. Keep using those strokes back and forth to blend the colours together. If you're using watercolour paints, try doing this on damp paper. You'll find that your colours blend together much easier when they're wet, rather than laying on top of each other. Watching this back, I can see how much I kept playing with the gradient when I easily could have stopped a few minutes before. When I was finally happy with the way the yellow looked, I went back into the middle with some pure white gouache. Because I took so long fiddling with the bottom, the top had actually dried, which makes it so much harder to blend it with the blue. I like to drag the white all the way to the bottom and all the way to the top, so it really merges in. Of course, I couldn't help but keep fiddling, so it ended up being a long process of accidentally adding blue and then trying to cover it up with white again. When you're done, the gradient should go from a deep dark blue, lightening towards white in the middle, and then intensifying back to a fiery yellow at the bottom. Next up, it's time to add the silhouette of our city. I've decided not to draw in an outline of the buildings, but now would be a good time to add that in pencil if you'd like to. You can use anything black to colour in the buildings. I'm using some black gouache because I like how dark the black actually is compared to some felt tip pens. I'm using a teeny tiny brush to get as much precision as I possibly can. Of course, a silhouette of whatever you'd like would work here. You could do a landscape with some tropical palm trees or some houses with telephone wires. I think this theme is really versatile, and I will probably end up revisiting it with a slightly different spin in the future. I like to try and include some variation in the height and shape of the buildings. Try to have some fun with them by adding domes, spires, a big feature Ferris wheel like the London Eye, and also just have some simple blocks. I think this really adds some visual interest and contrast. I like using the dot grid of the page to help me keep everything in a straight line. If you're stuck for ideas, there are plenty of silhouettes to look up on Google or royalty-free sites like Pixabay. I posted this page on Instagram nearly a week ago, and there have already been a couple of recreations based on this theme. I'll pop them in the top right hand corner of the video now. I would love to start making this a regular thing, so if you do a painting based on any of my previous spreads, tag me over on Instagram. It sounds very cliche, but they really make my day. Okay, so finishing your silhouette probably won't take too long. Mine took about 10 minutes. It's now arguably the most satisfying part of the whole process, peeling the tape. Hopefully you have a nice clean edge, but if not, don't worry, because you can just go in with a white gel pen to cover up any paint that's leaked out. I like to use a Uniball Signo Broad or a Posca white paint pen to correct any inevitable mistakes in my journal. After the fiasco in my last video, I'm quite happy that went as smoothly as it did. Now, if you're just doing a painting, then congratulations, you're all done. It's time to stand back and admire all of your hard work. If, like me, you're creating your weekly spread, it's time to put in your days of the week. For this, I'll be using a stamp set that I got off Amazon. I'll leave a link to it in the description box below. I'll also be using a black fineliner and my trusty ruler. I have serious respect for anybody that can draw straight lines without needing to use one. I am the girl who couldn't stay in the lines when colouring at school, the girl that drops things that I'm holding for no reason at all, and the girl who falls over standing on flat ground. I will attempt to draw a straight line when I'm too lazy to find my ruler that has ended up under a pile of other things, but it will be wonky. Moving on, I divide my page into 4 roughly equal sections. I use the dot spacing grid in the front of my journal to help me work out how many squares I need in each section. I then use my essential ruler to draw a line across both pages, leaving a gap just before the start of the painting on each side. I'm going to use the stamp set to put the date in the top outermost corner in each section. I think it's actually slower than just writing out the number, so it doesn't save time. I just like the finished look. I do my best to keep the stamps straight, but some of them always end up in the wrong place or at a slant. I also tend to press at an angle accidentally, so you'll see the square rim of the stamp in places. I don't bother to cover these up because I quite like the imperfect look it gives the page. The last section on the page is for notes, which I signify with a capital letter N. I can jot down things I want to remember, like my hospital moving to an emergency rota in this week, or any tasks for the following week that don't fall on a specific day. The spread is finished by writing in the days of the week under the numbers, and there you have it. Thank you so much for watching this video. I'll leave a couple of links to some other videos that you might like at the end of this one, and be sure to like and subscribe to see more content coming up very soon. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day wherever you are in the world. Bye guys.